Here we go. We had the time hop yesterday from 539 when Jews were 538 when the Jews were permitted to rebuild the temple. 42,000 people go back, we're told, and their slaves and servants and stuff. In chapter 2, chapter 3, they start to build, they put together a foundation. But chapter 4, the locals come and complain. The Samaritans, quasi-Jewish syncretists, keep Judaism and their old religions before they were, I should say, keep Judaism, but keep some form of worship of the God of Israel. And thus they managed to complain about the Israelites, the returnees from Bavel, and the rebuilding of the temple, which the foundation had been done, had been put on pause. And chapter 5 moved forward to an extent between different years. And we continue with the story about the year about 519, 518, 517, something of that sort, where we will resume the rebuilding of the temple. We had a foundation laid, but for about 20 years it stood dormant. And that's chapter now, again, chapter 5. V'hit nabi Chagai Nivia, Uzacharia bar Ido Nivia, al Yehudai di Vihud Uvierushalayim bishum ula Yisrael Alehun. You see that this chapter has switched, as we saw in the last chapter, into Aramaic, and it talks about the prophecies of Chagai and Zechariah, two prophets who we met, the prophets of the Second Temple period, two of the final three prophets, according to traditional Judaism. The last one is going to be Malachi, and they're offering prophecy to the Jews in Judah, in Jerusalem. Biden Kamuz Rubavel Bar Shtiel V'Yeshu Bar Tzadakus Rab Lebivna Beit Elohadi V'Yerushalayim V'Imahun V'Yad Eloha Misad Lahon. And what happens is Zerubbabel, who 20 years earlier had been given the permission by Cyrus, but then it had been taken away, along with Yeshua, who was the Kohen Gadol, was also given permission. The two of them began rebuilding the Beit HaMikdash with the full support and the charge of the prophets of God. You remember that book, Haggai says, enough with the this is going to happen and that's going to happen, just go and do it. Was what he said. Just go up to the mountain and do it. But once, right, what happens? Tatanai, the governor of the province beyond the river, sort of Persian governor on presumably the other side of the Jordan River, and Shitar Boznai and their colleagues, they come and they said, who allowed you to build this house? Right, it was stopped. And continuing in verse 4, let's look at the English. We said to them, what are the names of the men who are engaged in this building? But God watched over the elders of the Jews, and they were not stopped, while a report went to Darius, and a letter was sent back in reply to it. So we have letters going back and forth. Right, reminds us of today, the hallowed halls of the United Nations and the European Unions and Congress and all the different people that are sitting there and debating what should happen in Israel, etc., etc. And here's the text of the letter. We're told in verse 6 that Tatanai, the governor of the province beyond the river, and Shetar Boznai and his colleagues, the officials of beyond the river, sent to King Darius. Right, and in verse 7, Pasuk Zayin Pitgama Shalchu Alo Hai Uchedina Ktiv Begava Daryavish Malka Shalama Kalo. And right, they sent him a message to him, and this is what is written to King Darius, greetings and so forth. And just a comment. We have parts here that are in Aramaic, we have other parts that were in Hebrew. And when we see, at least to me, what my understanding is, the parts where we have Jews under the control of the others, the complaining Samaritans, the Persians, governor here, and the lack of ability to just do things as they want, we switch to Aramaic. It's a demonstration of the fact that we're not in full control. And he says in verse 8, be it known to the king that we went to the province of Judah, to the house of the great God. Well, that's nice. It's being rebuilt of hewn stone, and wood is being laid in the walls. The work is being done with dispatch and is going well. And we went and we asked them the question in verse 9, who issued orders to rebuild this house and to complete it? We asked their names so we could write down the names of their leaders for your information. Nothing like a good tattletale, right? And we're told, and this is what they answered us in verse 11. What do they say to us? Uchenima pitgama hati vuna lemeimar anachna himo avo dohi di ela shmaya Ve'ara uvinyan beta dihava bane mikmat dina shnin shaginu melech Yisrael rab bin ahayu ushechalei. What did they say? We are the servants of God in heaven and the earth. We were building the house. It was originally built many years ago. A great king of Israel built it and completed it. Lahan min dahar gizu avantana la'ela shmai yahav hamo biyan Nebuchadnezzar malch Bavel kasda'a uveita dina satre va'ama hagli lebavel. But because of our fathers, our ancestors were evil and they didn't act properly, God handed us over to Nebuchadnezzar, the Chaldean, the king of Babylon, and he destroyed the house and he exiled our people. Baram b'shnat chad l'korosh malka di Bavel, korosh malka sham te'em beit Elo adina lebnei. But King Cyrus, in the first year of his reign, he issued an order that we can rebuild this house. And in fact, they say in verse 14, and the silver and the gold vessels from the house of God that Nebuchadnezzar had taken away from Jerusalem, right? We're in verse 14, and brought to his temple in Babylon. Cyrus released them and gave them to Sheshbazzar, whom he appointed governor, Sheshbazzar, who is also called Zerubbabel. Va'amar le, in verse 15, El ma'anya, say azal achet himu be'echala d'Yerushalayim u'veit Elohai yitbana ala Torah. And he said to them, take these vessels, go deposit them in the temple in Jerusalem, and let the house of God be rebuilt on its site. Edayin Sheshbazzar dach'ata yahav Ushaya di veit Eloha di Yerushalem umin edin v'adkan mit ben avle v'la shelim. And Sheshbazzar came and he laid the foundations, and that's chapter 3, the laughing, the joy, the happiness, the crying, the confusion that happened 20 or so years earlier. And ever since then, it has been under construction, but is not yet finished. Ucha'an hein al malka tav yitbakar bebeit genizaza di malka tamadi bebavel hein iti di min koresh malka sim te'em lemivna beit Elohah dach b'Yerushalem u'ru'ut malka al dana yishlach aleina. And now, if it please the king, let the royal archives there in Babylon be searched to see whether indeed an order had been issued by Cyrus to rebuild this house of God in Jerusalem. May the king convey to us his pleasure in this matter. May he tell us what it is that is desired. And so here we see this incredible chapter again, and the difficulty that happens when the Jews are trying to rebuild their temple. They don't demonstrate and say, oh, the people complained and therefore we shouldn't be doing it. And just a couple of takeaways here as we go forward, sort of 20 years. Prophetic leadership can reignite missions that have stalled. The temple, it was in abeyance. It was not really being built. It was halted because of external opposition, and sort of the government halted it. But God comes to Haggai and Zechariah and reignites their mission. And sometimes you need a fresh voice. You need somebody who's speaking in a prophetic tone, whether that be actual prophecy, like Haggai, Zechariah, whether you see somebody who has that authority, that initiative, that hope, that desire. And that's something that we see in this chapter. Also, sometimes, again, this is sort of like that Phil Knight, just do it. Like that's what Zechariah and Haggai especially said to the Jewish people, but that's what we see here. Zerubbabel and Yeshua, at this point, Darius is in charge. Cyrus is not there anymore. And they go and do it. They just act courageously. Yes, their permission had been taken away, but let's give it a second shot. We have to just try. Will it work? We don't know. Will it be stalled? We don't know. But let's give it that shot. And, the Jewish leaders, they're not scared. They don't hide. They don't resist. They openly explain their mission. And so they're transparent, they're strong, they're faithful, and they move forward in what they think is their mission and what they need to do. And it's an important lesson just in our lives in general, what we do, about the need, the importance. And if you believe in your mission, if you have inspiration and inspirational leaders, and you're doing what's right, and outside pressures perhaps have not allowed it to succeed, you always have another chance to go forward, to move forward, and for a project such as this one, the second Beit HaMikdash, to be rebuilt.